المبذولة وأيضا هي مناسبة أيضا لنؤكد رئاسة وأعضاء أننا سنستكمل مسار العمل الجماعي بتعبئة الجماعية وأيضا بمواكبة لكل الأطراف في الجهات الخمس الإقليمية على المستوى الإفريقي من أجل أن نتقدم في تنزيل الأهداف 17 للتنمية المستدامة. اتركوني أن أعبر لكم عن سعادة خارقة لأن في هذا المكتب تحققت المساواة التي هي أحد الأهداف الأساسية للتنمية المستدامة، وأدعوكم أن تصفقوا لهذا الإنجاز بشكل كبير على خلاف المكتب السابق. وهذا الحمد لله تقدم على مستوى قارتنا الإفريقية ويترجم أيضا تقدم محرز على كل المستويات في كل بلد وفي كل جهة من الجهات الخمس للقارة الإفريقية. On passe pour entamer en fait notre ordre du jour. Commençons par l'adoption du projet de l'ordre du jour. Vous avez sur votre dossier tous et toutes le projet de l'ordre du jour. Si vous n'avez pas d'objection, on passe à l'adoption directe. Pas d'objection, c'est adopté. On passe maintenant au point 4 de notre ordre du jour relatif à l'appui à la mise en œuvre du programme 2030 et de l'agenda 2063. Lors de l'examen de ce point, nous allons mettre l'accent sur l'appui apporté au niveau régional et sous-régional pour la mise en œuvre du programme de développement durable à l'horizon 2030 et l'agenda 2063, c'est-à-dire l'alignement entre les deux agendas, l'agenda 2030 et l'agenda de notre continent africain 2063, et sur le progrès, l'état d'avancement, les réalisations accomplies dans cette mise en œuvre. Dans ce cadre, nous avons deux présentations qui seront faites par le CEA et la Commission de l'Union africaine. Je demande d'une manière fraternelle d'avoir d'avoir la présentation dans le meilleur temps, parce qu'on a vraiment beaucoup de retard j'appelle pour la première présentation le représentant du CEA, Monsieur Paul Puga.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished participants, honorable ministers present, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start the presentation, I want to remind us of the words of wise man Chinua Achebe several decades ago on inclusiveness, empowerment, and equality, when he says, when a child washes its hands, it can eat with kings. And I think the people of Africa have washed their hands, the children of Africa have washed their hands, the women of Africa have washed their hands, the men of Africa have washed their hands. What they need is empowerment, they need inclusiveness, and they need equality in access to opportunity and to exploit their potentials. Now, I want to look at the draft report of the 2019 Africa Sustainable Development Report, which is aligned with the theme of the high-level political forum, and therefore it covers 6 goals. Somebody with the, if you put goals, goal 4, goal 8, goal 10, 13, and 16, and goal 17. This report is prepared jointly by the African Union, the African Development Bank, the UNDP, and ECA. This year we are privileged to have the APRM Secretariat join the preparation process. We use data, available data from international sources for comparison, and as I said, we focus on the goals of the high-level political forum. This is the third year we are doing the report, looking at the 6 goals, and we complete the cycle of the 17 SDGs. The report is aligned with the Agenda 2063 and covers the related goals of Agenda 2063. Some of the key messages, we are talking about progress in education. Our coverage is improving at pre-primary, primary level and secondary level. However, the completion rates are very low. The quality of education remains low, and we need to improve child-friendly, disability, gender-sensitive schools and training institutions, focusing on skills that will enable the young population to be engaged and productive. Growth has been happening on the continent over the last 15 years, in some cases higher than the rest of the regions in the world. However, this growth has not hit the target of 7% at the average. Some countries have hit and gone beyond the target of 7%, but on the average, the continent still remains at about 4% to 3.5%. The target of realizing sustainable development goals, sustainable development, is not yet hit. Labor productivity is quite low and growing very slowly, and this has large implications for Africa's capacity to catch up with the rest of the world. Trade is a key element for Africa's sustainable development process and transition. There are some improvements, especially in regard to aid for trade commitments, which have doubled over the last 7-8 years. And we still need to do more, especially in terms of opening up the continent for intra-continental trade, removing non-trade barriers, etc. Realizing the sustainable development goals in Africa will take, requires a lot of investments. Some estimates show that these are about 600 to 640 billion dollars per annum needed to meet sustainable development. This is about 1/3 of the continental GDP. Infrastructure spending is increasing, but we still have large gaps. Spending on energy, again, increasing, but large gaps to meet the requirements for sustainable development. Similarly, investments in social services, education, health, water and sanitation, etc. Okay. Looking specifically at the 6 goals, looking at education, as I've noted before, there are improvements in pre-primary enrollment, primary school enrollment. Gender parity is improving in terms of enrollment. However, completion rates and transition between grades remain very, very low. Estimates show that on average, 64% of children of age to be in primary level are not completing the primary school. There are high dropout rates, and which definitely impact on skills acquisition and the ability to participate in economic activities. So more investments in this regard, and the drive to see that universal primary education, universal secondary education are effective, is very, very important. Looking at goal 8 on decent work and employment, as I've noted before, growth is happening. On average, in the last 2 years, 2017-2018, Africa recorded up to 3.2%. Some countries are achieving 7, 8, 9%, especially the countries investing more in infrastructure. However, this growth remains below the target of 7%. The prospects over the medium term remain around 3.5%, which is boosted especially by improvements in commodity prices and the global economic trends. But Africa's growth is vulnerable to changes in commodity prices, conflict on the continent, low levels of technology adaptation, and large informal sector. In some cases, outside of agriculture, up to 50%, more than 50% in some countries of the population of 50% of the population are employed in the informal sector. There is limited access to financial services, and this hits women more than the men, as you see on the slide. However, the potential is strong, especially given Africa's young population, and over the next 15 to 20 years, Africa will have a labor force of more than 1 billion people. But these need to be skilled, they need to find opportunities for gainful employment, training in entrepreneurship, etc., etc. Looking at goal 10 on inequality, we see that despite the growth that has been happening and continues to grow, Africa remains one of the most unequal regions of the world, with a Gini coefficient showing about 0.43. This is a high number, one of the highest. More specifically, 7 of the top 10 most unequal countries globally are found in Africa. And this is really a challenge for opportunity for everybody. It's a challenge to inclusiveness in terms of growth, and it is a challenge to sustainable growth and transformation. The incomes of the bottom 40% are growing slowly. Only 2 countries recorded growth of more than 5% in 2012-2016. 4 countries registered negative growth. The draft report shows some of these details. Social protection services are limited, and yet we have large proportions of vulnerability on the continent. Children and women face the brunt of this inequality and lack of inclusiveness, especially because of challenges of intra-household resource allocation and ownership of property. One report shows that almost 50% of children in Africa live in extreme poverty. Looking at Goal 13 on climate change, action for climate management, there is some progress on the continent, and Africa's contribution in these areas remains limited, but in part because of low incomes. But as incomes increase, there is increasing resource consumption, and this will continue to affect our impact on the climate. We need to be conscious as we move forward with economic growth and transformation, and engage more in activities and interventions that are going to help preserve our environment and our climate. There is some progress in terms of coordination, progress in terms of resource mobilization, and also some progress in terms of scientific research towards climate change management. In terms of Goal 16 on institutions, peace and justice, some progress happening, but big challenges still remaining. we see some of the indicators showing high levels of homicides, and reporting on this area are, again, there's a lot of limitations because of data. A few countries that report victims of trafficking by age and sex show high levels, especially among girls aged under 15. For women aged between 18 and 29, at least 1 in 10 have faced or experienced sexual violence. This challenge is higher for those regions and countries that are in conflict, and we have a handful of them on the continent. Now, for the goals, and we have focused more on the financing requirements in this paper. The financial requirements are large, up to $638 billion per annum. The funding for infrastructure, funding for energy, social services is large. However, Africa has the scope to mobilize more resources from both the conventional and non-conventional sources. Right now, on the average, Africa's tax to GDP ratio is at only about 16%. Some countries, the ratio is at only 8%. So there is scope for improving resource mobilization. Domestically, there is a scope for improving resources from the private sector by investing more in infrastructure, attracting capital markets, attracting and engaging the private sector and civil society to even think and look at sustainable development goals as one of the key elements in which they need to invest and to do something to create change for the continent and for the world. Finally, emerging issues, again, quality of education, effective learning are very critical towards empowerment, inclusiveness, and engagement. Addressing inequality has an important contribution to realizing all the goals. Addressing inequality has implications for poverty, positive implications for health, positive implications for education, etc. Measures to combat climate change, environmental degradation are a priority for all, so communities, private sector, civil society, government agencies, parliaments, etc. need to be engaged and to promote action to change and preserve our environment. Mobilizing domestic and external resources, we still have the potential and there is capacity to do more by improving our investment climate and providing infrastructure, etc., etc. Trade is an element that will promote sustainable development, promote transformation of the continent. We need to do more to improve the share of Africa in global merchandise exports. By improving intra-Africa trade, will create a big impact. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Paul Pouga. Je pense que je prononce mal votre nom.